You are looking live.
There's something sacred about this stadium and its setting. There's nothing like this venue, in my opinion, in all of sports.
The setting is about as good as anywhere in the country. With the San Gabriel Mountains in the backdrop, it's always picturesque.
We're going to play football. Yes, he's going for the corner. He's got it. Vince Young scores.
That gets me every time. Welcome, everybody. I'm Sam Farmer of the Los Angeles Times. This is Rose Bowl Live on behalf of Darrell Dunn, the Chief Executive Officer of the Rose Bowl. And our guest this week is Lincoln Kennedy, longtime NFL offensive tackle, star player at University of Washington, team captain. He was an All-American at Washington and just a phenomenal player, a phenomenal guy, played in 3 Rose Bowls. Really should get his mail at the Rose Bowl. He spent so much time actually. And this is a personal highlight for me, too, because I covered Lincoln as a beat writer at the University of Washington in those great Husky years. And then I went on and covered the Raiders for the San Jose Mercury News and covered Lincoln with the Raiders and his illustrious NFL career where he got to a Super Bowl. So welcome, Lincoln.
Well, it's good to be with you, Sam. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's great to see you. We were laughing about, I can't believe it's been 30 years since those University of Washington games and the great experience he had playing Michigan twice in the Rose Bowl and beating Iowa in the Rose Bowl. So, and you look like you can get back out there. So I want to sort of give people the format because I'm kind of new to this, to the Rose Bowl Live, and people are watching on Facebook and on YouTube. And I want to remind fans that they can ask questions, and we'll reserve some time at the end of our chat here to get some questions from viewers because they often have the best ones. And so I want to field those and talk about a whole array of things. But first, I want to talk about what's happening in the country at the moment and your sort of history with what you've experienced as a black man in America, a big man, a guy who's driving nice cars, lives in nice places. I wonder if you've been affected by racial profiling, if you've encountered that at all over the years.
Yeah, well, I mean, we were talking about college. There was one instance where I was driving in college in Seattle. And back then I had a 1983 Cadillac Barrettes. I remember that I was in the city, Seattle, and it was stopped at a stoplight. And I think it was my roommate, Darren McKinney, who was in the car with me. We were coming back from grabbing something to eat anyways. So anyways, I looked across the street. Noticed a cop car. I noticed 2 white officers sort of looking at us. And this is during the time of the stoplight. Didn't really think anything of it. But something in my mind said, the way they keep looking at us, they're going to pull us over. We're going to get stopped. And that's exactly what happened. I remember it specifically because I remember complying with the officer's instructions. And back in the day, we were always taught, especially coming up in my neighborhood, comply with everything the officer says. Don't give them a reason not to, want to do something to you or give them a reason to want to do something to you. So both hands on the steering wheel, looking straight ahead. Yes, sir. No, sir. All due respect. But didn't find anything, wasn't speeding, just wanted to stop me. So that was probably my first true run-in that I can remember with racial profile. Happened a couple of times, most notably when I moved here to Arizona, happened to me as well. I know what it's like to be a black man in this country. I know I've experienced racism in every way throughout my life. Probably the most blatant and upfront was when I lived in the South playing for the Falcons, just the experiences that I had down there. But for the most part, I know that it exists and it still systematically exists these days. And what I'm most concerned about as a father is for my kids, the future for my kids, because I would have hoped this country could have made strides further than it has. And, just the other day when looking at the news with everything that's going on with the protests, my 11-year-old son asked me, if the police are here to protect us, why are they hurting so many people? And that's a very difficult question to answer. So I'm perfectly aware, and I'm just trying to do as much as I can as a father to raise young black people for tomorrow the next generation, and try to make sure they're respectful and love everybody. Try and do my part, as well as the media platforms that I have and businesses I own. Try to treat everybody equally.
Does this feel like we're at a sort of a seminal moment?
It is. I think it does. It's sad because this country has always been so reactionary. Something happens, then we react rather than being proactive and trying to get in front of it. The whole thing when it revolves around sports, obviously, what's going on in the NFL right now, Sam, and you hear about the players, standing up for rights as well as all the sports. But the biggest question that you have people asking these days, well, are they going to be kneeling for the anthem? And is it disrespectful to the flag? I mean, all these questions that have to be answered. And it's so you've got so much pride on both sides that sometimes they conflict. I'm hoping that the results lead to change. We've got to get more people to vote. We got to do things differently because the way we've done them, really, I'm fearful as a black man to even leave my house.
Let's roll back the clock 30 years and think about you as a young, highly sought-after recruit coming to the University of Washington from San Diego. I think you were a defensive lineman, weren't you, at the start? Tell me about that, because
well, you know what? Here's the thing. I didn't start playing football, Sam, and I think you know my story, but I didn't start playing football until I was in 10th grade. I mainly played the band. I played the trumpet. Matter of fact, that's how my high school coach found me. He saw me on the marching band on the field at halftime show. Came up to me shortly there. Yeah, well, that's true. That's right. Came up to me a couple of days later and said, "Hey, what grade are you?" And I said, 9th grade. He said, "You're coming out for football next year." I'm like, "Oh, okay." So be it. So that's sort of how I got into football. But when everything kind of just came cascading down with the recruits and stuff like that, and recruiting and the letters and the interest, I really didn't know what to do. And, he had said, pick a couple schools that you'd like to see, that you'd like to experience out. And so one way that I kind of narrowed down the numbers is I told all the schools that would recruit me, give me a chance to play defensive end, defensive tackle. My sort of idol when I got into football was Ed Too Tall Jones. That's why I wore number 72. And the reason why is because I was always the tallest in my class. I was always taller than everyone else. So I could just relate with him with the name alone. And I tried to be like him because when I played, everybody was so much shorter than me. I just felt like I was just too tall. So that's why I wanted to play defensive tackle / defensive end. Went to University of Washington. They did recruit me as a defensive tackle. And I was with Mike Lustig and Steve Ettman. We were the three recruits that came in that freshman year. And that was the first year I had Randy Hart as a coach. And he made me detest defensive linemen.
What did you notice about Ettman? Obviously went on to become the number 1 overall pick. What did you notice about him right away?
Well, there wasn't really anything that stood out. I mean, here we are, 3 kids. Everyone wanted to talk about my size, how big I was. Ettman and Lustig looked like just 2 regular guys. I mean, stocky, obviously, because they played defensive line, but there was nothing that really stood out. It wasn't, the calling that came for us was after that true freshman year because we redshirted. And the fact is that we were out there practicing, doing everything that everybody asked. We were, the blocking dummies for the offensive line, and the dummies for the defensive line to get work on. We were everybody's dummy on the scout team, did all that stuff. The true freshman year, redshirt year, and then we went 6-5. And for us coming in, that had broke the consistent string of bowl games for the Dogs. I think the year before they went to Independence Bowl or something like that. So we felt like crap coming in. It's like, man, we didn't really sign up for it. And I remember this because I remember after one practice, after the season was over, Coach James had a team meeting, and he said there's going to be some changes. And he wasn't specific as to what the changes were, but he said there was going to be some changes. And I think it was that night when we went to meal table as a team that I remember sitting with Dave Hoffman, Darius Turner, Steve Ettman, Mark Brunell, myself, and maybe a couple other guys. And we were the incoming sort of freshman class. It was just like, right. We didn't sign up for this. We got to get this stuff together. So the very next time that we had, the spring drills and stuff like mat drills, we started cracking. Coach James brought in a new offensive philosophy. That's Keith Gilbertson. And then we also changed the defense around. Coach Lambright went to a more 46 style Bear Bryant type of defense, attacking defense. So Don James called me in his office right before we went to start spring football, and he's like, "Look, we recruited you as a defensive lineman, but we're changing our defensive style. And to be honest with you, you might not play that much if you want to stay over there, but it's totally your choice." So I went home. I went back to my dorm room that night, and I called my high school coach, John Shacklet, who was my mentor, who brought me in the game in the first place. And I said, "Coach Shack, they want me to move over to offense." And he's like, "Really?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "What do you think I should do?" He said, "Well, Lincoln, I'll tell you, I'll be honest with you." He's like, You're a decent defensive lineman, but you make a better offensive lineman. And if you go over to the offensive side of the ball, I guarantee you one day you'll be all pro." And I'm like, "Really? You think that much?" He's like, "Trust me, you can do this." And so that's how I became an offensive tackle or offensive lineman.
Now, some of the best interior offensive linemen that I've known in the last era of football, I'm thinking about Chris Dealman and Steve Hutchison, started out as defensive linemen.
Yes.
Is there a mentality that helps you, an attacking mentality, a mindset that might help?
Yeah, yes and no. If you're an interior defensive lineman, you know how to fight and contain in a confined space, which guards and centers are used to, as well as defensive tackles and nose guards. And what I mean by that is that all this time you usually have people down around your legs. You got to keep up high, so you got to really know. Where I think, it kind of helped me on the outside, especially playing tackle, was because I was so big, I was used to being in space. And so that really helped me sort of conform when I was a tackle, whether I was playing the left or right side, just knowing how to manage and keep that space, maintain that distance and that equal, keep the pocket presence.
Now, you mentioned something there. You said whether I was playing the left or right side. You did a little different at Washington. You had a strong side tackle and a weak side tackle. So you really had to play both depending on whether you were with the left-handed Mark Brunell or right-handed Billy Joe Hobert. You were the blind side protector, right?
That's exactly right. And then we also had an offense that we would flop. So even if, say, Billy Joe was in the system and we wanted to go like open side, there was a lot of times where I protected the open side, the split side, as opposed to the power side with the tight end. But then, there were a couple times later in the career when we went 12 personnel, 2 tight end sets, that I would be covered up. But a lot of times I was on the open end. I'm
thinking of a game against USC at Husky Stadium. Mm-hmm. It was the all I saw was purple game when Todd Marinovich was just mowed over by that defensive line and the Huskies got to him.
Yeah.
What are some of your early memories? We'll sort of head into the first Rose Bowl that you played in, but from that season, and I guess it'd be 1990 season.
That was my very first start. As I said,
is that right?
Yeah, that was my very first start. So 1988 was my redshirt year. 1989, I moved over to offense and played sparingly here and there. But 1990, that game, SC at Seattle, was my very first start. And I started at guard. So we had our tackles already set. Jeff Palcoa was outside playing left tackle. And I think Soup was already set up on the right. If I'm not mistaken. But that was my very first start. And I started at left guard. And I remember that day because, one, it was unusually warm for my experience in Seattle at the time, and on especially on game day. And 2, we ran a hell of a lot of screens, so I had to get on the perimeter. I was dead tired after that game, but it was thrilling because I had always taken the Southern California rivalries to heart: USC, UCLA. No, we alternated with UCLA. USC was my ultimate rival, who I wanted to beat every time. And I remember my first year there, with my redshirt year, we didn't. And then I don't know if we beat them in '89 when we went to the Freedom Bowl. I think it might have been a close game. But 1990, that was the big one. That was a real big game for me, and we put a stomping on them. It was a good time.
Yeah, I mean, that was when people realized, wow, this Husky team is really good. Did you feel like there was an East Coast bias, or the games would be on so late, or they were just ignored in the Pacific Northwest? Did you feel like you were sort of playing in a bit of a in a little bit of a bubble, witness protection program?
You know what, Sam? To be honest, here, what's really funny about that is that it wasn't until the following year that we kind of thought we were being disrespected because nobody knew us, the 1991 year national championship year. And the reason why I say that is because I remember specifically when we would go over to the team hotel and we would turn on ESPN, I was just hoping that they would talk about us. You see, when the college football, you just want to see your school and colors. You just want to be able to showcase. And I'll never forget Husky Stadium when I first got there. They had 2 crow's nests on the upper platform of the stadium underneath the press box area. Two crow's nests for cameras. That was it. By the time we left there, we had plenty of crow's nests around the stadium because we were talk of the town. So to answer your question, we really didn't know because we didn't know. You see what I'm saying? Right. The whole thing about Coach James, and may he rest in peace, is that he never talked about a national presence. His thing was win the Pac-10, go to the Rose Bowl, win the Rose Bowl. That's all he ever talked about. Never talked about a national championship, never talked about whether the world knows us or we're getting coverage. He talked up every opponent to make them seem like gangbusters, the best team out there, and more important. And then he said, we need to take care of business. Just go to the Rose Bowl and win the Rose Bowl. So we didn't know about national prominence until we felt slighted. You know what I mean?
Yeah. What was Don James like? What was he really like? I mean, we saw him as being a bit removed. He'd be in that tower coaching, and he'd be directing his assistants. He didn't seem to be on the ground much. And I didn't see him laugh a lot. But what was he like behind the scenes?
Probably the most intimidating little man I've ever been around. I remember when Coach James came to my home to recruit me, and I remember the city, and at that point I was used to coaches, especially football coaches, being somewhat personable. Unbeknownst to me, when we came to Seattle, the only time you talked to Don James is when you got in trouble or you were a captain. That's it, because he did just like you said, Sam. He coached his coach to coach his players. So only thing, Coach James would walk and the seas would part. Everybody just move out of the way. And so when we came out to practice or to a game, he would lead us, wouldn't say anything, just start jogging out, make sure we stay behind him, don't be in front of him. And then we start practice. We would jog around the goalpost, and he would jog with us and stay behind him. Then he would go and do his thing and from his tower and stuff like that. And you knew whenever he picked up that megaphone and said something, somebody was going to get it. Somebody was in trouble.
Yeah, a lot of people don't know
Great
that
guy.
Don James up there was as revered as John Wooden was down here, or John McKay at USC. I mean, this was a legendary figure, and he could be very intimidating.
Yes.
Let's talk about that. One of Don James's, I guess, sort of peccadillos is that he would like to stay in the same hotel, right? I know that when he brought you down for the Rose Bowl, you stayed in Anaheim. I think
Anaheim Marriott.
Take you away from the fun. I talked to guys who said, it was so boring being down. He wanted to keep us away from LA and all the fun. And he said, Ed Cunningham in particular said, we were so ready to play Iowa in that game because we'd been down there for 2 weeks and we were kind of.
Yeah. We got spoiled. We got spoiled in our time there because, especially my career, I spent every Christmas in Los Angeles, 1 Freedom Bowl and 3 Rose Bowls. It was crazy. But Anaheim Marriott, we had the little separate annex that was off to the side, and that was all football players and football personnel. And they monitored the girls going in and out of there so we couldn't have any fun. But it was always the same. The practice, I can't remember where we practiced at, but it wasn't that far from where we were staying. And everything was the same all the years down there. But, the great thing that for me, obviously, when we realized that we won the Pac-10 in 1990 and we were going to the first Rose Bowl, going to Iowa, we were so hyped up for that game because it was the first time that our team in quite some time our school had quite some time experienced winning the Pac-10 and going to the Rose Bowl, going back to the Rose Bowl. So there was a lot of pressure. I think we felt on our shoulders, and everybody wanted to do everything right because we were down there. We were cracking hard for 2 weeks, practice getting ready for Iowa.
Huh. And you think about the number of NFL players involved in those games on the field in those games. It's pretty staggering, especially in the Washington side. Yeah. How many of you guys wound up in the league?
Mad respect, Sam, for Iowa and Hayden Fry because we knew nothing about it. We hadn't played Iowa before, and the only thing I remember people talking about was how they painted their visiting locker room like pink or something like that because it was supposed to calm you down mentally or something. That's the only thing that we took. So we had no idea what we were going to get from Iowa other than a stand-up tight end. And we're like, what the heck is
that? So what was your experience? What was your experience? Entering the Rose Bowl for the first time. Just the pageantry of it, the history of the Rose Bowl. What are some of your memories as a young, wide-eyed kid?
The first Lowry's Beef Bowl we had the eating contest against the other team. That was eye-opening, because in 1990, first I was just 20 years old. I mean, it wasn't 20 years old. I was like 19 years old, and so this was an eye-opening experience. The whole LA scene as the guest of honor was a big deal. But walking into the Rose Bowl, driving up to Pasadena, it was my first time really experiencing, because even when I went to UCLA, I never went over to the Rose Bowl. I just went on the campus in Westwood. But when driving up to it, you're driving into this valley with all these big old homes and everything else. Like, this is where you're gonna have a stadium, and you pull up, and it looks like it should be in someone's backyard, but it's humongous, right? And you walk in and you see 100,000 seats. You just see this just big old stadium. Now, Husky Stadium was built up and was really close to, but this is like huge. And so you're just like, whoa, we have really arrived, and this is really nice. So I was like a kid in a candy store. I mean, I remember coming out, and I actually got a chance to play a lot that game. I couldn't start because the guard that was in front of me, I was still playing guard. In front of me, it wasn't Kirkland. No, he was strong side guard. I'm trying to remember who it was. But anyways, Coach Gilby had told me that he was a senior and he was trying to get him on the next level. He's trying to get him drafted, get some exposure, and wanted to use that game. So I didn't start, but I did play a lot in that game at guard.
Tell me a little bit about Keith Gilbertson and just what kind of guy he was, and was he the impetus for you moving over to offense? Was he the one who pulled you over? I mean, you mentioned Don James doing that, but
it's funny that you mentioned that. So back to the conversation Coach James and I had. He's like, you can go play offense because there's a coach who's interested in you. And I just, as I was walking over to Coach James' office, that's the first time I saw Gilby. And Gilby was like, what position are you? He said, hey, big man, what position are you? And I said, defensive tackle. And he laughed as he went in his office. Unbeknownst to me, that was Keith Gilbertson who already said, I want him. Bring him over to the offensive side. And then I met him and said, oh, you're Coach Gilbertson. So Coach Gilby and I have a great relationship. And the main reason was because the light eventually went off for me playing football under his tutelage. We had come in from a game or practice or something like that, and we were doing film study. And he had always called me, Little Lloyd Fauntleroy or something like that, because I was always analytical and over the top analytical. So we're watching film one time, and he's like, Big Kennedy, why did you do this? And I sort of broke down with a long-winded explanation on why I did something on the first play. And he got up, he turned around, he had the film control in his hand. He said, wait, turn on the lights real quick, turn on the lights. He said, what did you say? So I went through the explanation again, and he just looked at me. He said, Kennedy, I don't give a damn. Just block the SOB. That's it. And so at that point, the light went off for me. It's like, wait a minute, it's not about technique. Just get the job done. He's like, I don't care how you do it. Just block the SOB. And I'm like, the other choice of words. And I was like, oh, okay. Yeah. Light goes off. You have your own technique. And I developed my own technique that sort of drove him crazy, and other coaches that coached me after that crazy, because it just wasn't the normal thing that especially tackles did.
Right. I want to remind viewers that you can ask questions on Facebook or on YouTube, both streaming formats, and we'll get to those questions at the end. Tell me about the name Lincoln Kennedy, growing up with the name Lincoln Kennedy. What's the story behind that? And
well, I don't know if you can see behind my degree from UW, my legal first name is Tamerlane, okay, Tamerlane, and I'm a junior. My father's name is Tamerlane, and so growing up, my father was called Tam or Tammy, short for Tamerlane. You know how we like to shorten everything. when I was born, my mom didn't really care too much for it. She didn't want her son to be grown up called Tam or Tammy. She didn't think it was a masculine enough name. So I'm born on Abraham Lincoln's birthday, February 12th. So my original nickname was Link. They used to call me Link. And then you remember those days back in school, Sam, where you had the first day of attendance and the teacher would read off roll call and stuff like that? Well, they would butcher my name. They would put B's and all kinds of letters. Tamberlane, never. And I was like, just call me Lincoln, okay? I expanded to Lincoln at that point, but just call me Lincoln. So a funny story about that is that when I was drafted in 1993 by the Atlanta Falcons, after negotiating my contract, I went to pick up my signing bonus check, and it was in the name of Lincoln Kennedy, and I couldn't cash it because I had no ID that said Lincoln Kennedy. I couldn't even deposit it in the bank. I had to go down and file for a Social Security card to get it, also known as, AKA, I had to get another security card, take that to the bank. I was holding on to my signing bonus check for almost 2 months before I could get in and get it done, but I couldn't cash it because it was Lincoln Kennedy.
And I take it this was not a small check as a
you know what?
first round pick.
It wasn't bad. It was a nice check. I really wanted to cash it. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. So now going back to now the 91 season, you guys go undefeated. Although I will say you were number one in the nation before the UCLA game, 90, right? Was that?
Yes. Well,
Brad DeLuiso made a kick in the rain. I remember that.
Yeah, you remember that game. So going back to that moment, that's when we started getting a little ahead of ourselves. And what I mean by that, the success that we had after beating Nebraska, people began to take attention to notice us. That was that 91. I'm sorry, 1990. The success that we had from winning the Rose Bowl, people started taking notice of us. But during that year, we started scoreboard watching. And I remember specifically playing against UCLA, how we were scoreboard watching when we should have been paying attention to what was going on the field. Because there were many people who were speculating, since we had climbed up in the polls, that if we had beaten UCLA, we were expecting to beat them because I think we thought we were a better team than they were. But if we had beaten UCLA, then there was a chance that we would have been up there with Virginia or whoever it was that was in the top three. But we lost and we fell back. So that was the time when Coach James specifically said, you got caught scoreboard watching, you didn't take care of business. Always handle business first and let all the chips fall as they may.
Okay, that was Tommy Maddox, I believe.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. The next year, you didn't scoreboard watch as much, evidently, because you went undefeated and rolled into the Rose Bowl.
And that one was the Cal game. The one that stood out was early against the Cal game because it was in the Bay Area. It was at Cal, and it was a hot one. And Cal had really given us a run for our money. They were very similar to us. We got a couple lucky breaks that fell our way to take over the game, but that was probably our biggest challenge. After that, we were just on a mission. We were on a mission because we saw that there were people who were talking about us in the national spotlight, talking about, and of course, with Steve having the year that he had and everything else, all the things that were going on team-wise for us, we had everything in front of us. We just had to go out there and take care of business. And, you know how great of a sports town Seattle is. The fact that we had won the Rose Bowl and we had this much success the following year, I mean, we were more, popular than the Sonics and the Seahawks and the Mariners back then. You know what I mean?
No question. And did the team have a different personality with Mark Brunell and then Billy Joe Hobert? Did Hobert have it just seemed like that team, maybe the quarterback doesn't have that much of an influence on a college team versus a pro team.
Well, here's what I remember specifically about the two quarterbacks. After Mark went down, he tore his knee up in the spring. A lot of us, oh my goodness, what are we going to do? We just won the Rose Bowl with this guy. He's MVP, and he's our guy. And he's not in right now. So in comes Billy Joe Hobert, and I remember having a conversation with Billy, several conversations, because I was right next to him. There we go. There you go. But I locked right next to him, and Billy Joe was one of those guys who sat there and said, nobody thinks that I can run the football. No one they think I'm just a passing quarterback. So he took the challenge to want to be, because we had speed option in our arsenal. He took the challenge that he wanted to be known as a running quarterback. So Billy Joe Hobert wanted to elevate his play, not only through the passing game, making guys like Mario Bailey, relevant, and of course Aaron Pierce and all the other weapons that he had, but he also wanted to show that he could run the speed option. So that opened up parts of our game, expanded parts of our game that really made it hard for defenses to key in on. Then when Mark came back, everyone told Mark that you can't throw as efficiently as Billy Joe Hobart, and so Mark took the challenge that I'm going to show you what I could do. So it went back and forth, but that play, that sort of accountability out of the quarterback position, really helped us with offense and scoring points, because we were making it almost impossible for people to come back and beat us, especially with that defense we had.
Mark Brunell came in that Rose Bowl in 1992 when you were playing Michigan, and led the Huskies on a touchdown drive. What do you remember about that? It's sort of an emotional moment, right?
Yeah, it was an emotional moment because here was the last year's Rose Bowl MVP coming back into the game, and we've got the game in hand, but I'm still out there. We're going to give it our all. And he comes in, he says, "Look, we're going to go deep, Mario. We're going to hit MB in the end zone." And I was like, "Okay, once we score, everybody go down. We're dancing in the end zone." So what made this really high impact moment is that the touchdown was caught by Mario Bailey. He did the Heisman pose in the end zone, and then a couple seconds later, we had all joined him in the end zone. We were all dancing like we lost our mind, and Coach James scolded us when we came to the sidelines.
and you on the call will remember that Desmond Howard had done the pose earlier in the year, and Desmond Howard obviously is on the field for Michigan, and watching Mario Bailey do the Heisman pose in the end zone. But that was so. Share the national championship that year. Next year, a rough year. Team starts off very well, goes on probation by the end of that year, ultimately, and will lose us to Michigan in the Rose Bowl. I want to go on to your NFL career. Now, there were two great tackles, you and Willie Roaf taken. I believe it's the Saints took Willie Roaf, didn't they?
Yeah.
There was a lot of expectation that you'd be the first tackle off the board. It was Willie Roaf. Did you feel like there was competition with Willie Roaf?
Not necessarily. I mean, the thing is my agent was quite informed and in tune with the way things were. Now, I remember, getting drafted. Joe Bugle was the head coach of the Arizona Cardinals at the time. And I remember coming for a visit down to Phoenix and talking with Bugle. And Bugle had said, simply, he's like, "Look, I'd love to take you at number 3. But Tony Mandridge had just ruined it for offensive tackles to be taken in the top 5. And he said, but I'm still going to try to swing for you. I'm still going to try to pull for you." I was coming into that draft in 1993, everyone was confident that the first 2 picks, they knew what it was going to be. The New England Patriots and Seattle Seahawks. And they ended up taking Drew Bledsoe and Rick Myers. So they knew the first 2 picks off the board were going to be quarterbacks. They just weren't sure of the order. Once that happened, the Arizona Cardinals called me at position number 3. I was on the phone. I was eventually pick 9, but I was on the phone with every other team except for Chicago at that point, just on the phone, the possibility. And all of them were asking the same thing: "Do you want to be drafted by this?" And I had in my mind really just wanted to be the first lineman taken off the board. When New Orleans pick came around at number 8, they had me on the phone. And then my agent was on another line. He says, "There's a tackle out of Louisiana, a local kid, that just makes sense for them. Very similar body to you, very similar playing style to you." He's like, "It just makes sense. He's highly touted. I think they might take him because it's a smart business move. Take a local kid, makes you look good." And so it made sense for Willie Roaf to go to New Orleans. Right thereafter, Ken Herock called me from the Atlanta Falcons, and he had me on the phone. And he says, "Would you like to be a Falcon?" And I said, "Absolutely, coach." And the rest is history.
When I think about your NFL career, I really think about 2 distinct careers. You had your start in Atlanta, and that was fine. Then you came to the Raiders, and it's like the switch was thrown, and you not only became one of the preeminent offensive linemen in the league, but also a team leader, et cetera. Tell me about that Atlanta start. And
June Jones. June Jones was the offensive coordinator. Jerry Glanville was the first head coach I had, and he was there the first year I got to Atlanta. June Jones was the offensive coordinator. And June Jones had already had it in his mind that because of a certain size, I needed to be a certain weight. And I had success, and that was the big stickler when it came to the league and what people thought of me. It was always regarding my weight. So we got off initially on a bad field. And then I remember as trying to play in the run and shoot system. Again, you go back to my days at Washington, I talked about my technique. Well, my technique was somewhat unorthodox, but it was effective. I didn't get beat. So that was what was that promoted solace in my mind and stuff like that. But it was a little bit unorthodox, and a lot of people questioned the technique. And June Jones wanted me to do things one way, and I'm like, look, you're not out there on the end against Ronaldo Turnbull in the New Orleans Saints Stadium where I can't hear the quarterback. You want me to settle on an angle? That just doesn't make sense. I'm not trying to get my quarterback killed. So, there were instances like that we kind of clashed. Long story short, I felt that I only signed a 3-year deal because I kind of had my agent had told me this might happen. You might not fit in this type of offense. If that's the case, we need to get out of there. Now, that was the first year of the first CBA where free agency. It started after year 4. So, right. You were a restricted free agent after year 3. I only signed a 3-year deal. I took less money to have less time in Atlanta, and it actually paved the way for me because after June kind of benched me and it didn't play, I wasn't happy. I was really frustrated. I was really frustrated my time there. And I remember going to Ken Herock at the end of year 3, and I said, either cut me or trade me because I'll never play in a Falcon uniform again. And Ken had said, look, well, we can't just let you go. You're a former first-round pick. I'm like, I'm not playing for that man downstairs. They had put another guy in who I didn't think was as effective or as good as me, but I didn't come around to sit there and watch from the sideline. So that's not why I started playing the game. So I demanded a trade and eventually got out to Oakland.
You're with the Raiders then. What year was that with the Raiders?
First year was 1996. Bugle was the offensive line coach. Mm-hmm.
Okay, Bugle was Mike White was the coach.
Yes.
Maybe.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
It really seemed like you fit in there, and they were able to build around you. And right. What are your memories of Al Davis and sort of Al picking you out, saying, "I want that guy"?
The best story that I have of Mr. D. And I'll backtrack a little bit. Coming out of college, I played in was it North-South? East-West Shrine game, big college one. So we were practicing at Stanford Stadium. And I remember walking up the hill from the practice field or the field, and there was Mr. Davis off in the distance in his white jumpsuit with his glasses and had his white towel. Butch was by him and everything else. I think so. And so here I'm like, oh my gosh, that's Al Davis. I'm a college kid coming out. I go up to him, and Mr. Davis, my name's Lincoln Kennedy. He's like, I know who you are. He says, you're a great player. You're probably not going to be around when we draft, but I promise you one day you're going to be a Raider. And I'm just like, whoa, really?
Wow.
So I'm on cloud 9 as I'm walking to the locker room. I'm just like, dude, Al Davis knew who I was. I'm thinking I'm the stuff, anyways. So, that fast forward, when I demanded a trade from the Falcons, there were a couple teams that were interested. And I remember my agent calling me and saying, hey, the Raiders are interested. I just got off the phone with Al Davis. He wants to make you a Raider. And my first question are they still in L.A. or are they going back to Oakland? Because I knew they were back and forth. And the reason why is that up until that point, I had partied with a lot of those L.A. Raiders. They weren't thinking about football. So I didn't want to go to a place where it was just a bunch of distractions and stuff like that. I wanted to play football. Right now, people had written me off as a first-round bust. I wanted to get out and crack some heads and show that I can actually play this game. So he said, no, they're going to be back in Oakland. And so the trade happened, and when I first went over, it was in end of May. We had a mini camp. I remember it was actually still in Sepulveda. I'm not Sepulveda.
El Segundo.
El Segundo, that's right, El Segundo.
Yeah.
But we went for mini camp, and I remember walking out of the field, and I saw Mr. Davis, and I said, hey, Mr. Davis. And he said, Lincoln, I told you you'd be a Raider.
And you got the click.
You got the click.
In there.
That's what I told you I'd be a Raider. But, the great thing about it is not only did Mr. D make me feel at home, but the moment I showed up, Joe Bugle pulled me in the office, and he says, you are my starting tackle. He said that straight up. He's like, you're my starting tackle. Now go out there and play. And he said things like, hey, look, I'm not really concerned about the weight because I know you can handle it and you can play. Just don't get over, don't get too heavy or whatever it was. That was his thing. But he started me. I think there was one game we started at. I started at left tackle. I think it was against Seattle and Oakland. And then the next game I started right tackle. And then the following game I started right tackle. And he came to me and he said, Lincoln, You're a good left tackle, but you're a damn good right tackle. And so I'm going to put you on the right side and leave. I'm not going to flip you around anymore. And the rest is history.
Yeah, I remember as a reporter covering that team, we would veer to your locker for any topic. It'd be kicking. We go talk to Lincoln Kennedy. You were just such a great person to deal with, and just your knowledge of the game was remarkable. But one of the memories I have of you, it's a little bit of a crazy memory, was the snow game in Denver.
Wow.
When they were pelting you guys with snowballs, and you, who are off the field, very mild-mannered, nice, approachable, got hit with a snowball and
lost it
a little bit.
Lost it. Sam, there's no other way to explain it. I lost it. It's not one of my prouder moments. I seriously lost my temper. I remember, the game was. Remember we went in overtime. I still got a picture on my wall of it, of going up in the stands. But the game went in overtime. There was a long run to beat us, and I remember turning around, heading to the locker room. Now, at this particular point, I hated the Broncos because we could never beat them. Even when we had a good team, we just could never beat them. I couldn't stand the Broncos. So when we turned around and walked into the locker room, I see all these snowballs rain down, and I saw guys like take off running. And I said, I just played 5 quarters of football. I'm not going to run. I said, I'm tired. So as I'm walking back, I just turn my head slightly to the right, and I see this guy just rear up with a snowball in his hand, and wham, hits me right on the bridge of my nose. And I'm like, son of a... So I do this with my glove, and it's bleeding, and I lost it. I was like, the old Mile High behind the team bench used to have like a chain link fence, a real loose, like chain link fence. It wasn't really anything. So, I saw red. I went to that fence, and I was going to try to climb that fence, but there were people who were already walking out. And I'm like, okay, well, I can't do that because it'll hurt people. And my big ass on this fence is just going to make everything go down. So I walked around to the entrance where they had a gate and walked up to the stairs where the guy was. And he was still throwing snowballs, still just frolicking, having fun. And I'm in all my gear. And so just came off the field, helmet on and everything else. And I'm like, look, you son of a bitch, you broke the skin on my nose. I want an apology. So he got up and he grabbed my face mask and he said, get out of here, you bleeping Raider. And I said, oh, pop. His brother jumped up, or whoever his friend was, this guy next to him. I think it was his brother, because he's like, hey, you can't do that to my brother. Pop! Knocked him out too. And I was going, there was another guy who had come down the stairs. I was about to hit him, but at the time we had one of our PR guys who was hanging from my arm. And I remember because we went up a couple stairs and he's hanging from my arm and he's like, Link, no, stop, please. I'm like, oh, what am I doing? And of course, unbeknownst to me, to the left of it, because this was a walkway that you could walk down, to the left of there was like 3 rows of Raider fans. And they just rushed over. It was a small melee. And I'm sitting there like, oh my gosh, what did I cause? What did I stop? So at that particular point, the crowd behind me was getting a little raucous, and they saw me in the stands, and all of a sudden it went south really quick, even more than it was. So I got off the field, and I remember the police coming to the locker room. And when they came in and they saw me, I'd already had my shoulder pads off and I was in my T-shirt and pants. They saw me, they looked up at me like, the guy wants to press charges. And I said, okay, I'll be more than happy to go with you, officers, if I can grab my stuff. But I said, let me just inform you that if anything happens to me or I miss my team playing, I'm suing the stadium, I'm suing security personnel, I'm suing the city of Denver, I'm suing everybody I possibly can because you did not protect me. This guy broke the skin on my nose with a snowball. I had something in it, like a battery or something like that, because it was sharp. And it was a pretty good gash across the bridge of my nose. Yeah. And I said, you guys didn't protect us. So I just defended myself. And they were like, one moment, we'll get back to you. And so they left and nothing ever came of it. But, the legal department, I think, was contacted. I was subpoenaed by the district attorney for Colorado, but Denver, city of Denver, but never went there because they eventually just dropped it.
I remember watching that unfold from the press box at the old Mile High and thinking, and what the people watching this now, you've probably picked this up, but this is the most easygoing, nicest guy. It's just like, I mean, he was completely different than who he was on the field.
Yeah, I lost it.
So to see that juxtaposition with fans was unusual and noteworthy, certainly. I'm looking here at some Facebook questions. Somebody asks, big Michigan fan, did your coach enjoy beating them, especially more in the '92 Rose Bowl? Yeah.
So going up against Michigan, we felt a certain energy the year before going up against Iowa, but it was really more personal going up against Michigan for Coach James and his staff, mainly because of what was on the line. Now, again, Coach James was never one to talk about national championship. He was all about, let's take care of our business. Let's let the voters vote or whatever. But we had worked our butt off that year, and we thought that we were the best team in the country. And we needed to go out against Michigan, a premier team that got all kinds of accolades. They got the Heisman Trophy winner. They got Elvis Gerback, who's probably going to be a high draft choice quarterback. I mean, this physical offensive line, Jumbo Elliott, all the stuff talked about was Michigan football, Michigan football, Michigan football. And so we were, wanted to get our fair share of respect. So it was that much more personal for Coach James and the staff taking on Michigan. And we really wanted to show them that we knew how to play football on the West Coast.
Lincoln, somebody asked, the Huskies have been back in the national spotlight in the past several years, including visiting the Rose Bowl game again 2 years ago. What do you think it will take for the current UW program to take the next step on the national level?
They got to get busy. They got to get bigger. They got to get more physical. Those are the first two things that stand out to me. And the reason why I say that is that I was at that Peach Bowl when Washington took on Alabama, and I was on the sidelines. And I remember looking at a number of those Alabama players and like, these are some grown-ass men out here. This is what, and it's, I mean, look, it's, Sam, you cover this stuff. You've seen this stuff. You go back to the SEC, the Big Ten, and now a lot in the ACC, especially Clemson, whatever they're doing with the water or something down there, they're building my size guys across the board. You see what I'm saying? Not just offensive, defensive line. These are some big men. They're playing a physical brand of football. In order for the Pac to sort of compete against that on a national scale, you got to get bigger. And I don't know how you do that unless you go down and recruit that. I mean, I was huge. I always was one of the biggest ones. But you remember, we talked about my time, I had Supeli Malamala, who was similar size and stature. So you had bookends that were huge. I mean, that's the reason why Napoleon Kaufman came to Washington. He saw us. He's like, wait a minute, you're my tackles? Oh, yeah, I'm coming here. I know I'm going to be protected. So, in order for the Huskies to get back, they put some great teams out there, not trying to slide anything. Winning the Pac-12 is very difficult. I love the type of football they play, especially in the West Coast. But as far as the national stage, the only way that you're going to become relevant is that you have to beat one of those premier teams on a national stage when you have it. And the Huskies a couple years ago fell short against Ohio State.
Another question here. What values did sports teach you that you've applied to the rest of your life in your career as a father, et cetera?
Accountability and teamwork is the main one. I remember when Coach Gilbert gave the speech on accountability, it stuck with me because at that point, I never wanted to let my teammates down. I went out there with the purpose that I treated my quarterback like my girlfriend. You're not touching my quarterback. You're not touching my girl. You touch her, I'm going to break your face. You see what I'm saying? So, and that was the mentality I had. But more importantly, I played at a level to where no matter what I was going through, mentally, physically, emotionally, I'm not going to let my teammates down. I never really truly realized how good I was. I just played the game because I love the game. I enjoy the game. But more importantly, I wanted to share the success with my teammates.
Lincoln, on that note, I really want to thank you. It's been a fun hour with you. Great reconnecting. It's been Rose Bowl Live on behalf of Rose Bowl CEO Darryl Dunn. Thanks so much, and best of luck in the coming days and weeks.
Thanks, Sam. Stay safe and stay strong, brother.
Thanks, buddy. You too. Thanks, man.
You are looking live.
There's something sacred about this stadium and its setting. There's nothing like this venue, in my opinion, in all of sports.
The setting is about as good as anywhere in the country. With the San Gabriel Mountains in the backdrop, it's always picturesque.
We're going to play football. He's going for the corner. He's got it. Vince Young scores.